Hey everyone, welcome back to Psyched About Life, where we talk about psychology, life, growth, and personal development. Today's video is all about exploring your resistance and understanding it, and then to ultimately diminish it so that we aren't resisting the happiness that we deserve and getting to our true potential or our true selves. So if you saw the previous video I posted yesterday or today, honestly I can't keep track anymore. I read this book, still reading it, called The Inner Work. It's awesome. It's really like a path to self-discovery, growth, and it's enlightening. I just got finished with reading about resistance and how there may be roadblocks in our lives that stop us because of our beliefs and our perception of what's going on, that stop us from getting that fulfillment out of life, that happiness. And the more aware we become of this and the more we practice those things like self-compassion, positive self-talk, changing our perception of reality and the issues that we face, it can come a long way and help us stop resisting what life has to offer and achieving our true happiness. So obviously easier said than done, but we do want to acknowledge this because I feel like so many times we tell ourselves like, oh, that's not going to happen to me. That's just not in the cards for me. Like I'm this kind of person, so that's not going to happen, right? Like we put these expectations and these perceptions of what we deserve, or however you want to put it. There's so many ways of putting it, but when we practice those things like having compassion for ourselves, changing our perceptions, we can really see the world differently, see our lives differently day by day, and then open ourselves up to receiving that happiness, that good in our lives, and stop with that resistance that we're building, that wall of resistance, essentially. And I just wanted to mention this quote that's from this book from Dr. David R. Hawkins. The first spiritual trap is to perceive your happiness as outside of yourself. So it kind of goes into that consciousness, and I know that in my other video I talked about that 3D reality to 5D and then so on and so forth, that if we focus on the physical world and not really dig deep into that deep emotion, the bigger picture, focusing on outside of ourselves and also trying to control our feelings and be more self-aware, that is part of that resistance. That's essentially part of those roadblocks from becoming happier and becoming our truest self and our true potential, reaching that goal, because we're seeking that happiness, that joy from outside of ourselves. And that contradicts that consciousness, that self-awareness. Like we want to come to terms with our lives, who we are, practice that self-compassion, and ultimately we will receive, and change that perception. And so that's really what this video is all about, what resistance, kind of like an introduction to the video. And if you watch that video on The Shadow by Carl Jung, I always say Jung, Carl Jung, in order to be closer to your true self, reborn as your true self, which is your freest form, you have to release that attachment to the shadow identity and resistances your mind has constructed over your lifetime. Of course, this will be difficult because you're fighting that past programming or your defense system. Also, those wounds will come up, right? Wounds of rejection, judgment, loss, distrust, inadequacy. All of that stuff will come as roadblocks. And we may even have that internal dialogue happening, right? And we don't want to reinforce that negative things and those negative wounds. We want to support and validate ourselves. Unless we become aware of what is actually taking place, we will never be able to move on from it. So know that uprooting these mental narratives would mean the death of an identity the mind has worked so hard to formulate. And so we must have compassion during this revealing process. So when we look further into ourselves and we do all of that healing, that uncovering, that wound, inner childhood wound, unmasking, people even say that it's like a really crazy transformative process. You become very emotional. When you work on that shadow work, like I've mentioned in previous videos, you become very vulnerable, and that opens up that weak, that soft spot that you have been suppressing. And it's tough. It's tough to journal about. It's tough to open back up. And for so many years, you've given yourself that narrative, you've defined yourself, and you have all these perceptions, but really when it's time to face what's really going on and open all that back up and take it for what it is and try to even change your perspective from all those years, it's tough. It's not easy, and that's something that you have to be conscious of and have that strength to keep going, because it's definitely not going to be easy. And I think during this process, during this healing journey, the biggest person that will honestly be our enemy, or that boss in the boss level of a video game, is ourselves. I mean, especially if we're doing all that internal dialogue, you're going to be your biggest critic, your biggest enemy, and it's going to be really hard for you to open yourself up to new experiences, which are uncomfortable. So you have to be ready to kind of accept all the good that life has to offer and trust the process. You know, it's like those boundaries within the mind keep us in check by convincing us that we can't do it, it won't work, or it wasn't meant for us. We start to believe that we aren't one of the lucky special people who get the opportunity of being happy and carefree. Must be nice to be them. If I had their life, I'd be happy too. And we then attribute blame to our conditions, circumstances, and even the world. The most important realization is that the source of our dissatisfaction is the mind's internal dialogue, not the subject of its complaints. Changing that dialogue, changing that negative to positive is so key. You know, most minds are actually very suspicious of someone emulating genuine innocence, unconditional love, and inner peace. Seeing someone else shine their light can really trigger someone who's insecure. So although it is happiness and freedom you are seeking, it is crucial to recognize that even while you are yearning to elevate yourself, there is still a huge part of you, an ego, shadow identity, stuck in a wounded theme of consciousness that actually does not want you to succeed in awakening. Really reflect on that, because in my previous videos I spoke about the id, ego, and superego, and it's all coming full circle. It's like, okay, well, if those are aspects of ourselves, what can I do to get to my truest potential, my true self, my true form? What do I need to balance, like a balancing act? What do I need more of? What do I need to focus on? And that's when all those practices, all that mind, body, soul reflection, mindfulness activities, doing what makes us happy, changing our perspectives, that all comes full circle. And that's when it really comes together in changing or challenge that perception that we have or have given ourselves for so many years just to get through all those wounds, all of those narratives we've had with ourselves or other people have had with us that really try to make up who we are, or that idea of who we are. But really, it's a lifelong process. It's a lifelong journey. I mean, like, we may not even know who we truly are until we have some sort of amazing self-discovery or awakening. You know, like, you could live most of your life thinking that you're this way, and then you realize you're really not. So it takes a lot of that practice, that mindfulness, and that consciousness to be opened up and revealed for you to really know who you are. And that's the honest truth. And the only enemy to ever exist is an eternal one. It's hiding in the very last place you'd ever look, within yourself. So, like I said, sometimes we are our own enemy. We're the biggest enemy of all, because we have all that dialogue with ourselves. We have our thoughts, right? I'm not thinking somebody else's thoughts. I'm thinking my own. And so our thoughts become reality. And if we can change that, if we can question all of that and take us out of that comfort zone, we can ultimately get to a place where we need to be, so we can have that awakening, have that self-discovery, and get to where we need to. And I truly think by practicing mindfulness, doing what makes us happy, doing that inner work, showing ourselves the same kindness and compassion that we may show other people or fail to show ourselves, and respecting ourselves and validating our own feelings is honestly key. It's going to help us overcome those barriers, those challenges placed in front of us, maybe even by ourselves. And if you feel like maybe you do have a good perception of what's going on around you, okay. But if you do feel like you're really negative or really hard on yourself, maybe that's like a a light bulb moment where you're like, let me try to think about this in a different way, a different perspective. Let me be kinder to myself. What kind of language and tone am I using when I'm talking to myself? So being more aware of those things is really, and conscious of those things is key. And that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Welcome. If you're new here, please like, share, subscribe for more content, and thank you so much for coming to my channel. Bye.